Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to discuss the meaning and nature of communalism and secularism in Indian context. This unit would enable the students to understand the meaning and nature of communalism, communalism as practiced in India, the meaning and nature of secularism, and the variant of secularism in Indian context. To start with, communalism in the broad sense means a person's attachment to his own community. This widespread discourse in India is understood as an unhealthy condition, that is, attachment to one's own community above any other fellow beings. As a result, it takes a negative connotation where people start promoting the interest of his community over other. It's an ideology that, in order to unify the community, surpasses the distinctions and cleavages within the community and emphasizes the essential unity of the community against other communities. In this way, it promotes belief in orthodox tenets and principles, intolerance and hatred of other religions, and thus divides the society. Communalism believes that the people of different religions have different interests in economic and political matters. It therefore puts the interest of the community above the interest of the individual. Positive aspects of communalism stands of the affinity of an individual towards his community, involving efforts for the social and economic upliftment of his own community. However, in negative connotation, it is an ideology which emphasizes the separate identity of a religious group in relation to other groups, with a tendency to promote its own interest at the expense of others. Now, to begin with, the meaning and nature of communalism in Indian context. The term communalism was first used by British colonizers to describe the situation in colonies like India and Malaysia, where various religious identities existed alongside each other. The colonial use of the term gave it a negative connotation of intolerance, divisiveness, and parochialism, thus helping to justify the colonizers' civilizing mission. The meaning of the term communalism itself is replete with the different interpretational problems. Social science literature in the international context attributes a positive meaning to communalism. In India, this term, however, has been used to denote a negative phenomena. There has been a trend which generalizes the global meaning to understand communalism as it exists in India. For example, communalism has been defined in relation to the community, which means a common identity accompanied by common culture, history, interest, and these characteristic features have been seen to have their basis in religion. This understanding to analyze the phenomena of communalism has presented certain distortions. The erroneous conception of community as a religious, caste, and other ascriptive group focused thinking is based on incorrect lines. The other trend has been to understand communalism in relation to competing religious group identities. In this, communalism is to believe and propagate that the social, economic, and political interest of one community or religious, caste, or ascriptive group is dissimilar, divergent, and antagonistic to those of others. This faulty notion of the concept projects a negative image of a genuinely religious man who is non-communal. In other words, communalism highlights only those aspects of religion which are hostile rather than those that are humanist and universal. In this sense, religion is only an instrumental cause in the growth of communalism. Another problem with the concept of communalism is that the way it is written about. The character of the writings on the subject often ends up distorting its meaning. These writings are, for the most part, the product of a peculiar historical context and specific circumstances. For instance, theorizing on the subject of communalism is a pre-1947 period was mainly one between nationalism and communalism. It was brought that since communalism was a pre-capitalist notion and a remnant of colonization, it would erode after freedom from the British and with the initiation of the process of modernization and development of science and technology. Communalism in its existing form and magnitude is thus a typical phenomena experienced only in the former colonies of the British Empire. However, it would be unjust to squarely accuse the British for the rise of communalism in India. Communalism appeared due to the social conditions prevailing in India. The Britishers just used it to preserve and consolidate their rule. There existed a reservoir of mistrust and suspicion among the members of different communities, which were exploited by the British colonialist. And this practice has continued ever since, even after India's independence. The nationalist discourse on communalism tends to differ. According to them, communalism was a weak force when the struggle of the national freedom attained its peak. Therefore, communalism is an outcome of the failure to indoctrinate national consciousness in independent India. In other words, it is the development of a disproportionately high loyalty to one's caste, tribe, religion, or any other group as against the normal requirement of prime loyalty to the nation. This overemphasis on nationalism as an ideology or as an ideological antidote to communalism, however, may result in the suppression of the urges of various subcommunities and subnationalities in a caste-ridden country like India. Communalism is a product of the failure to resolve social problems in a secular and democratic way. The slogan of nationalism in independent India is not a cure for the ills of social inequalities, unemployment, denial of civil liberties, etc. The most influential argument on communalism has maintained that it is essentially an ideology. The different meanings and the complexity of understanding this cluster concept have been left aside in favor of a trouble-free understanding of an ideology or an ideological set of beliefs, which in this case falsely represents the interest of a social group. Here, religion as such, even religious ideology, has little or nothing to do with communalism. Communal politics is the politics of religious identities, but beyond making out the social category in question, religious identity itself has little to do with the phenomena of communalism. In conditions of scarcity, communalism can be seen as one of the instruments of ruling class politics to blur the real contradictions. It divides or drives the life force from the conflict inherent in the contradictions of the specific form of capitalist development. It also manipulates the interest, mistrust and suspicion prevalent among various groups, religious and caste identities. Communalism as practiced in India. The revival of communal identities, in some respect, a universal and modern phenomenon, in the sense that modernization creates certain forces which sharpens every type of ethnic and religious identity. For modernization creates means such as education, expansion of media, politicization, economic and technological development, which creates a sense of self-awareness among the people. As people become aware, they first become aware of their own and immediate community to which they belong. There is another more important reason for emphasizing the modernity of communalism. In the era of modern mass politics, religious-based or influence politics has a power and strength that is quantitatively greater and more dangerous than any equivalent politics of a pre-modern era. The distinguishing characteristics of the politics of the modern era is the decisive implication of mass mobilization, mass appeal, and popular legitimization. Therefore, the politics of communal appeal today are thus in an altogether different catalogue from the politics of religious appeals in the past. The term communalism was first used by British colonialists as a phenomena that inflicts the societies of the colonies. The colonial use of the term gave it a negative connotation. It also is a way of understanding the Indian history as the colonialist viewed it. The Indian nationalist adopted the term, accepted the negative significance, but saw it as a colonial post-British phenomenon rather than a pre-colonial circumstance that the British inherited. According to Bipan Chandra, communal politics till 1937 was organized around government jobs, education, educational concessions, and the like, as also political positions, seats in legislative councils, municipal bodies, etc., which enable control of these and other economic opportunities. According to him, communalism developed as a weapon of the economically and politically reactionary social classes and political forces. Communal leaders and parties were in general allied with these classes and forces. The vested interest deliberately encouraged communalism because of its capacity to distort and divert popular struggle to prevent the masses from understanding the real issues. The British government used communalism to counter and weaken the growing national movement and the wedding of the Indian people into a nation. They favored one community against the other in services and promotions. The British policy of separate electorate was another factor. Therefore, communalism as a political ideology or philosophy has its root in the religious and cultural diversity of India. It has been used as a political propaganda tool to create divide, differences and tensions between communities on the basis of religious and ethnic lines, leading to communal aberrations and violence. According to Achin Vinayak, communal is a process involving competitive desecularization, which along with non-religious factors helps to harden the divisions between different religious communities and increase tension between them. Here, greater importance is granted to religious forces, religious identity, religious competition and religious ideologies, and to religious overlapping in popular, folk and elite cultures. However, the development of a strong collective religious identity among Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims and Christians is not a sufficient condition for the growth of communalism, but it is nonetheless a necessary one. Now we come to the meaning and nature of secularism. According to modern literature, secularism is a Western concept and it is related to the separation of the church from the state, which gives the state a position of neutrality between different religions, while at the same time it guarantees all citizens the right to observe any religion. Holyoake have been regarded as the originator of the concept of secularism because of his important works such as Principles of Secularism and the Origin and Nature of Secularism. The secular state, as defined scientifically, means a state which recognizes every citizen as equal and does not recognize any social and religious stratification for any political benefit. But what is generally projected as secularism is toleration of all religions with special emphasis on the protection of minorities and preservation of communal harmony. However, in the words of Rizvi, the essence of secularism rests on two basic principles: separation of religion from politics, acceptance of religion as purely and strictly private affair of individual having nothing to do with the state. Hence, secularism means separation of the state, politics and non-religious areas of life from religion, and religion being treated as purely a personal matter. So when India is said to be a secular state, it only means that the state will not identify itself with any particular religion, faith, and that no person shall suffer any disability or discrimination on the basis of religion. According to the Western concept of secularism, separation of religion and state is understood as mutually exclusion. The state will not mediate in the affairs of the religion, and in the same manner, religion will not interfere in the affairs of the state. Each has a separate domain of its own with independent jurisdiction. No policy of the state can have an exclusively religious connotation or rationale. No religious classification can be the basis of any public policy. If this happened, there is illegitimate intrusion of religion in the affairs of the state. Religious institutions cannot be aided by the state. It cannot give financial support to educational institutions run by religious communities. Nor can it hinder the activities of religious communities as long as they are within the broad limits set by the law of the land. For example, if a religious institution prohibits a woman from becoming a priest, then the state can do little about it. This is because religion is a private affair, not matter of state policy or law. Finally, this form of mainstream secularism has no place for the idea of state-sponsored religious reforms. This feature followed directly from its understanding that the separation of the state from church or religious entails a relationship of mutual exclusion. The Indian variant of secularism. In India, multiculturalism has a different and strange name. It is known as secularism and is a multifaceted expression meaning different things to different people. Secularism seems incompatible in a land that is home to virtually all the major religions of the world. As a doctrine that advocates the separation of religion and state, it has little meaning in India. It means equal respect for all religions as the Indian state defines it. Then the term seems incorrect. Until the beginning of the 20th century, secularism remained relatively vague as a political discourse in India. It gained distinctions in the 1940s after the Muslim League demanded separate homeland for the Muslims. The League grounded its demand on religious and cultural lines, arguing that the followers of Islam, Muslims constituted a distinct nation rather than a different culture. It expressed misgivings about the fate of the Muslims in a Hindu-dominated free India. As the League's movement gained momentum with the implicit patronage of the British, the Indian National Congress contested its claim by pointing out the syncretic religious tradition of India. It also criticized what it considered to be an illegitimate abuse of religion in politics and accused the League of indulging in the politics of communalism. Therefore, to distinguish itself from the communal politics of Muslim League, the Congress affirmed its faith in secularism. It argued that unlike the communal league, it was wedded to secularism. It had certain implications. First, it did not believe in misusing religion for accomplishing political objectives, but believed in confining religion to the private sphere. Second, and contrary to the League's propaganda, the post-colonial state would not discriminate on the basis of religion. Thus, the Congress invoked secularism to distinguish its politics from the communalism of the Muslim League. The twin goals were to affirm the moral superiority of the politics and to pledge the minorities that their rights would be secured in independent India. Since then, secularism has acquired new nuances and variant meanings in the context of Indian politics. Secularism has always inspired the political narrative of modern India. With the 42nd Amendment Act to the Constitution in 1976, the preamble to the Constitution asserted that India is a secular nation. Unlike Western notion of secularism, Indian secularism does not separate religion and state. The Indian Constitution has allowed extensive interference of the state in religious matters. India does partially separate religion from state. For example, it does not have an official state religion, and state-owned educational institutions cannot impart religious education. In matters of law in modern India, however, the applicable code of law is unequal. The India's personal law on matters such as marriage, divorce, inheritance, alimony varies with an individual's religion. Muslim Indians have Sharia-based Muslim personal law, while Hindus and Christians and Sikhs, they live under the common law of the land. The Indian Constitution permits financial support for religious schools, as well as the financing of religious buildings and infrastructures by the state. The Islamic Central Waqf Council and many Hindu temples of great religious importance are administered and managed by the Indian government. Secularism as practiced in India, with its marked difference with the Western practice, is a controversial subject. Supporters of the Indian concept of secularism claims that it is more inclusive and respect minorities and pluralism. Critics claim Indian form of secularism as pseudo-secularism. Supporters state that any attempt to introduce a civil uniform code, that is, equal laws for every citizen irrespective of his or her religion, would impose majoritarian Hindu sensibilities and ideas. Critics state that India's acceptance of the Sharia and religious law violates the principle of equality before the law. Indian secularism does not focus only on church-state separation, and the idea of interreligious equality is crucial in the Indian conception. Secularism in India needs to be understood in the context of a deep religious diversity and that predated the advent of Western modern ideas and nationalism. That was already a culture of Indian interreligious tolerance in India. The advent of Western modernity brought to the fore hitherto ignored and marginalized notions of equality in Indian thought. It sharpened these ideas and helped us to focus on equality within the community. It also ushered ideas of inter-community equality. Thus, Indian secularism took on a distinct form as a result of an interaction between what already existed in the society and that had religious diversity and the idea that came from the West. It resulted in equal focus on interreligions and interreligious distortions and dominations. The secular character of the Indian state is established by virtue of the fact that it is rather theoretic, nor has it established any one or multiple religions. Beyond that, it has adopted a very sophisticated policy in pursuit of religious equality. This allows it either to disengage with religion in American style or engage with it if necessary. The Indian state may engage with religion negatively to oppose religious tyranny. This is reflected in such actions as the ban on untouchability. It may also choose a positive mode of engagement. Thus, the Indian Constitution grants all religious minorities the right to establish and maintain their own educational institutions, which may receive assistance from the state itself. Thus, Indian secularism allows for the principled state intervention in all religions. To conclude our discussion, Indian secularism is primarily a solemn assertion of Hindu majority to honor the rights and privileges of minorities and to recognize the composite character of India's nationalism. Any argument about the Hindu identity as the defining feature of Indian nationalism is clearly untenable because it negates India's composite nationalism. However, the exploitation of secularism's ambiguities by various communities proves that it has provided the ideological basis for the promotion of communalism. Under the guise of showing equal respect for all religion, the state has blatantly promoted communalism of all hues. Thank you.